If you're a creator who prefers Windows, I've got the perfect new laptop for you. While Josh is back home in Sydney this week, I'm going to be talking about one of my new favorites, the ProArt P16. This laptop is a dream for creators. Beautiful OLED screen, comfortable keyboard, solid build quality while also being portable. But there is a big catch. There are 3 different configurations, and shocker, the $4,000 one is the best by a landslide. We got all 3 of them in. There are 2 with an RTX 5070, one with a 4K 60Hz display, and one with a 2.8K 120Hz display. Then there is the 5090 model with a gorgeous tandem OLED 4K 120Hz display. The tandem OLED is much brighter, which solves a big issue we had with last year's model. It's a shame that there's no option for the tandem OLED with a lower tier GPU. That would help with cost. Plus, you won't get the full benefit of a 5090 in this laptop, as its GPU is not fed max power. That being said, we were extremely impressed with its overall performance. We value your time, so the gist is that the 5070 version at around $2,500 is tough to justify given stiff competition from Lenovo's excellent Legion 7i and Yoga Pro 9i. Both can be had for much less. But for the 5090 version, it's very unique, and all of us here feel it is the best laptop for creators who want Windows and maximum portability. If you do want to buy it, now is the time of year where we are starting to see big discounts on laptops, so make sure you use our website bestlaptop.deals to track prices. First, the CPU is unchanged from last year's version, and it performs around the same, so we'll keep this brief. In Geekbench, the ProArt has the best single-core performance among similar Windows laptops and falls near to the bottom in terms of multicore. Its result is still good enough for most performance tasks. In Cinebench, it performs about the same as its main Intel competitor, the Core Ultra 9H processor, while lagging behind more powerful HX processors and the highest-end M4 Max chip from Apple. When we look at power draw, we see the HX370 chip in the ProArt draws about the same amount of power as the 285H chip in the Zephyrus G16 on average. They basically trade blows in CPU performance and efficiency. Next, we're going to jump into GPU performance, starting with video editing. In Adobe Premiere Pro, we see the 5090 version do the best, despite its mid-range AMD CPU and its lower wattage GPU. The max wattage for a 5090 in a laptop is 175 watts, not the 130 watts Asus are feeding it here. For context, that amounts to about a 13% drop in performance in Premiere if we're comparing it to a much chunkier gaming laptop, like the Alienware Area 51 with an HX chip and a 175-watt 5090. That's not a bad trade-off, honestly. The 5070 is also underfed wattage, but by a much smaller margin of only 10 watts. It still gets a much better score than last year's model, but only slightly edges out the Yoga Pro 9i and its 5060. In DaVinci Resolve, the only laptop that beats the 5090 variant is the MacBook Pro 16 with the highest-end M4 Max chip. The highest-end ProArt still keeps its trophy among thin and light Windows competitors. The 5070 has a bit of a below-average showing here, although it's still a nice jump over last year's. In gaming benchmarks like TimeSpy, both ProArts certainly do well, but there are much better options for gaming for way cheaper, like the Predator Helios Neo 16S, which costs half as much as this laptop. Its 5070 Ti and more powerful Intel HX processor are able to keep up with the 5090 version of the ProArt, not to mention the Blade and the Zephyrus both beating it with their lower-tier 5080s. The same can be said for the 5070 version, which is beaten by the cheaper Legion 7i. This trend continues in other gaming benchmarks, such as Cyberpunk 2077, with DLSS upscaling on and frame generation off. The Blade continues to do the best, but the ProArt with a 5090 still does well, getting around 100 FPS with 1% lows of 60. And now that it has that 120Hz screen, you'll actually be able to make use of it. Unfortunately, we did lower the resolution to 2560 by 1600 here to be able to compare it with these other gaming laptops that have that resolution. Switching over to 2x frame generation on in Cyberpunk, we see a very good result from both ProArts. Both maintain higher 1% lows, while a lot of the other laptops struggle. This could be a benefit of their different performance optimizations than a traditional gaming laptop. I'm making this guess because you can see the same thing in the Yoga Pro 9i and the Aero X16, which are also aimed at creators. You may think this is an issue of studio drivers versus gaming drivers, but we actually had to use the gaming drivers on the ProArt, so we don't think that's the case here. Both laptops continue to do well in Forza Horizon 5, which makes use of ray tracing. Here we see the 5090 version hit 120 FPS, while the 5070 hits 100 flat. Both maintain solid 1% lows. But that is, of course, at that standardized gaming resolution. So how do they perform at their native resolutions? Here's a quick graph showing the difference. The only one we're really disappointed by here is the 5070 with the 4K screen. You'd probably have to lower the resolution to have playable frame rates on that laptop. During graphically intensive tasks, the ProArts do get a bit warm on the keyboard deck. Nothing too annoying, but it would be noticeable if you were using the middle of the keyboard or the function row frequently. Fan noise is also pretty reasonable most of the time, only ramping up to 56 worst case, which is around the same or lower than most gaming laptops. If the fan noise is too much for you, good news. You can drop down to balance mode and performance doesn't drop by that much. You just get a little less fan noise. When I used the ProArt for reviewing one of our videos, the experience was comfortable. The top is really the only place it got hot, but your hands aren't likely to be there. Fan noise during editing was minimal, but it did ramp up at random times during light use, like in our team meeting on Zoom. It also stays a bit warm all the time. This was even though it was in balance mode. We found this super odd, and Seth confirmed it happened on his one as well. In fact, the fans even came on sometimes in whisper mode for him. The Zoom call is also where we found out it does not have the best webcam. Here's how the 1080p webcam looks on the 5090 ProArt. It does feature IR for Windows Hello. Here's how the 1080p webcam on the 5090 ProArt looks in overhead lighting instead of studio lighting. Here's how the 1080p webcam looks on the 5070 ProArt. It is a different webcam, but it still features IR for Windows Hello. Here's how the webcam on the 5070 ProArt looks in overhead lighting instead of studio lighting. For battery life, we're actually seeing something interesting. When comparing the 4070 version to the 5070 version with the same 4K 60Hz screen, the newer ProArt does a bit better. We checked with Asus to see why this might be the case, and we're still working through it. Both the 5070 and 5090 version last around the same, but their battery life isn't as great as something like the MacBook Pro, of course. If you want the best creator laptop with good battery life, the MacBook is still the best bet. When we're looking at performance on battery, the MacBook maintains its lead, scoring very well in Cinebench regardless of whether it's plugged in. The ProArt does make some improvements on last year's model though, seeing both a higher score and less of a drop on battery. The chassis is seemingly unchanged from last year, or the differences are very subtle if there are any. It's still a well-built aluminum unibody laptop with an attractive black coating that does pick up some fingerprints on the lid, but they aren't super noticeable. There's virtually no keyboard deck flex and very little screen flex. The version with the 5090 is only about a millimeter thicker than the 5070 variant due to its different cooling solution for its more powerful dedicated GPU. This is only noticeable when typing on either of them, where the keyboard deck is slightly higher on the 5090 variant. Neither of them feel too thick for a comfortable typing experience, though. It also helps that they've cut an angle at the front of the keyboard deck where the squared-off edge would have been. This means they don't feel like they are cutting into your wrist. As far as portability goes, these continue to be the lightest in their class if you get the 5070 version, and still close to the top with the 5090 version. They are similar to a MacBook in size, but are much lighter. Other than the graphics cards, the displays saw the biggest update this year. Let's start with what's unchanged. The 4K 60Hz panel from last year is available with an RTX 5070, but there are now two additional screen options. First, a 2880 by 1800 screen that refreshes at 120 Hz with a 5070. Both are around 400 nits, which isn't very bright. Lastly, for the top-of-the-line $4,000 version, you get a 4K 120 Hz tandem OLED with the RTX 5090. The main difference on that one is that it's noticeably brighter than the other two at almost 700 nits. All of the panels are still gorgeous, very color-accurate, glossy touchscreens. Reflections are easier to combat on the brighter screen. Moving on to PWM flickering, Seth and I both agreed that it was not very noticeable on any of the different screens unless you were at very low brightness. A couple disappointing things are that this laptop does not feature Advanced Optimus or G-Sync, which goes to show these are still aimed at creators first instead of gamers. There's also no mux switch, only an optimized mode which would prioritize the DGPU for graphically intensive tasks. The keyboard is another place we see that choice of creator over gamer reflected, considering there is no RGB backlight like its sibling, the Zephyrus G16. I'm sure the plain white is not a deal breaker for most people, and the typing experience is just as comfortable as that one's. Nice coating to the keys, a good amount of key travel, and the keys don't rattle. Seth wanted me to point out that he prefers a centered keyboard like this one without a numpad, but I'm sure some folks out there might be missing their 10 key. The arrow keys are also very small to make them look uniform, lining up with the top of the trackpad. Josh doesn't tend to like small arrow keys and prefers them larger, like on the Legion 7i. The trackpad is also pretty solid. It has a soft touch finish with a pleasant muted click. Seth noticed some slight rattling on all 3 of our models, but I'll be honest, I didn't notice it at all. If you're sensitive to it like he is, you might be bothered, as this is a very pricey laptop, but I found the trackpad very comfortable personally. It does have an Asus dial built into the top left corner. Josh tried this last year and felt it was very gimmicky. Using it just didn't feel intuitive or smooth. I would say it's been a bit improved this year in terms of responsiveness, but the speed of the dial was too slow for timeline scrubbing in Premiere and too fast for timeline zoom, in my opinion. This led to me having to adjust the speed in between tasks, which I think defeats the point of it being easier. If you didn't have a mouse with a scroll wheel, though, this might be nice to have instead. Something everyone agreed on is that this laptop would definitely feel more premium with a haptic touchpad, even if they just put it in the most expensive one. But as it stands, it's the one thing that a MacBook Pro 16 continues to have over this laptop. For ports, they are the same as last year's model, which were already good. Starting on the left, we have a proprietary charging port, an HDMI 2.1 port that only connects to the DGPU, a USB 4.0 that supports data transfer speeds up to 40 gigabits, a 10 gigabit USB-A port, and a headphone mic combo jack. On the right, we have a 10 gigabit USB-C and USB-A port, and then an SD Express 7.0 card reader, which can achieve transfer speeds of up to 985 megabytes a second. This is the same as last year's speed, but we were finally able to test it this year, and boy, was it super fast! The only disappointing thing, in my opinion, is the fact that the USB-C port on the right is not as fast as the one on the left, which means it only supports up to 2 monitors running at 4K 60Hz, rather than the dual 4K 120Hz support of USB 4.0. This USB-C port is also not able to be used in iGPU mode, as it only connects to the dedicated GPU. For connectivity, the laptop offers Wi-Fi 7 and Bluetooth 5.4. For maintenance and upgradability, I would say the back is a little tough to take off. There are 4 or 5 different screw lengths, and they all use the star bit. Plus, 2 of them are hidden under rubber feet. Once you get it open, you'll see that you have access to both full-sized M.2 slots, both of which are filled with a 2TB drive on the highest-end model. One is empty in the other configurations. You can also replace the Wi-Fi card or battery if needed, but the soldered RAM is not accessible. The biggest difference between these two under the hood is the cooling solution, as we discussed earlier. The 5090 version has a vapor chamber cooler, and the 5070 versions have a 3-fan solution. For Linux, we booted up Fedora 42 and everything worked. Brightness, Wi-Fi, trackpad, and even the keyboard backlight worked after some setting changes, so a pretty solid showing here. The speakers on this laptop continue to be great like last year's. Nice amount of volume, decent bass, and good clarity. Not quite as good as a MacBook still, but pretty top tier as far as Windows goes. Take a listen. So, what's our verdict? If you're looking for a Windows equivalent to the highest-end MacBook Pro 16, hey, you've finally got it in the 5090 ProArt. Go buy it, link below. If for some crazy reason your budget isn't $4,000, you've still got plenty of options for a good machine with a decent screen. We feel a 4K screen is probably overkill for most people, so if you're picking between the 5070 versions of the ProArt, we'd suggest the higher refresh rate 2.8K one. However, at that price point, we'd suggest you pick up either the Zephyrus G16, Legion 7i, or Yoga Pro 9i. Seth and I feel the Zephyrus is the way to go. It is essentially the same chassis as the ProArt, but with a 2560 display, which is going to be easier for the GPU to drive. And for the same price as the 5070 ProArt, you can get that laptop with a better 5070 Ti. Josh likes the Legion 7i over the 5070 ProArt. It has a much brighter display and a more comfortable keyboard. It is larger than the ProArts though, and like the cheaper ones, it caps out at a 5070. The Yoga Pro 9i is also a great option for those that don't game. It gives you a stunning tandem OLED display like the highest-end ProArt, comes with a more comfortable keyboard, but it also caps out at a 5070. If you have your heart set on any of these, you'll want to get them at the best possible price. Try setting a price drop notification on our website, bestlaptop.deals, so you'll get an alert when it goes on sale. That's where you'll be able to see all the laptops we recommend for various types of users, and we'll send you to the retailer offering the best deal on them. Thanks for hanging out with me and the team while Josh is away. Hope you all have a wonderful rest of your day.